Hello and welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes, episode number 145, George Allen. Now, before we get started, let me say this. George Allen is not forgotten, far from it. However, the story of his rise to become the great coach that he was, well, that's a story that I don't think gets told at all. And joining me on today's episode of Sports Forgotten Heroes to tell the George Allen story is Mike Richman, who recently released a fantastic biography about the coach called George Allen, A Football Life. And Allen's life, well, it was truly a football life and virtually nothing else. And let me say this, as we approach the 2024 holiday season, if you are looking for a really nice gift for the sports fan on your list, visit a bookstore and pick up a copy of this book or check out Mike's site, MikeRichmanJournalist.com. Again, it is a great book, and I promise, whether you get it for yourself or get it as a gift for someone else, no one will be disappointed. On today's episode, we are going to dive into a lot, but not everything. There is just way too much to cover, starting with George's youth, his friendship with 3 different U.S. presidents, his career in the USFL, and his comeback with Long Beach State, and so much more. It's all in the book. Mike did a terrific job, and once again, I encourage everyone to pick up a copy. Before we get started, please follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on X at SportsFHeroes. Check us out on Facebook, and wherever it is you listen, please follow, rate, and review. Okay, with so much to cover, let's dive straight into today's show with my guest, Mike Richman. Mike, welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. I am thrilled that you are able to find some time to join me and talk about George Allen.
Warren, I'm very happy to be here, Sports Forgotten Heroes. I mean, you know I have a lot to say about George Allen. You attended my book signing in Northern Virginia in September. So he was a fascinating figure in the world of football coaching. He had that eccentric life. Things were a lot different about him, the way he handled himself. But you cannot question all of the success he had as a football coach. And yeah, just a really, really great figure to write about. There was so much spanning his entire life.
Well, I got to tell you, if you didn't capture it all in that book, George Allen, A Football Life, I can't even imagine what else there would be to write about. You certainly did a thorough job, and kudos to you. And there is no way possible that we are going to be able to cover it all. So I'm just going to pick and choose some topics to discuss with you. And, as you and I had discussed, I don't think you can quantify or qualify George Allen as a forgotten hero. But what you can do is talk about his incredible life. It is a story about a football coach who I don't think people really know that much about, with the exception of he coached in the NFL. He coached for the Rams. He coached for the Redskins, and sort of disappeared afterwards, had the brief stint at Long Beach. But his lead up and his story to becoming such a successful football coach, I don't think has been told, at least not properly, like you did. And his time with the Redskins and the Rams prior to that, just fascinating stories. So I would just love to get into it with one question about his life prior to coaching, which is this. From the time he was a kid, what was it about competition, sports, that enthralled him so much?
Well, I mean, it's a very interesting question, and I touched on it the very first paragraph of the book. I said, I quoted him as saying, he was born with a type A personality. He had that industriousness about him, that motivation, that hunger to succeed. I mean, he was just born like that. He First of all, he grew up during the in the throes of the Great Depression, and you had to work hard and not to be you couldn't be fazed by anything during that time if you wanted to strive to succeed, and that's just the way he was. And in terms of sports, I mean, it really, I mean, it crystallized with his love of sports from a very young age, because as in high school he was a three sport star, football, track, basketball. He showed his love and wanting to devote so much of his time to sports, even at that young age. And he was very good at playing sports. But as he got a little older, into his teens and then into his college years, he knew he didn't have the athletic ability to actually play, but he thought of coaching, which was a really daring thing to think of at that time. You got to think, I mean, this was the 1930s and still in the Depression. And most people thought of more practical professions such as medicine, law, or business of some type. He wanted to be a coach. He had that love for sports, and he wanted to translate it in some way, and coaching was the avenue that he wanted to take. And it was a bold move, and he had breaks. He had Crisler, the football coach at the University of Michigan, who gave him a opportunity to be an assistant coach on the 150-pound then midget team at Michigan, which had just formed in 1947. And Allen was an assistant on that team, and from there he got his first head coaching opportunity at the college level at Morningside, and just it grew from that point on.
Yeah, he wanted to coach so badly, and you brought up Fritz Crisler. He wanted to coach so badly that he actually offered to pay Fritz at Michigan to join his staff in any capacity he could.
Right.
Tell us about his relationship, how unique it was with Crisler, and finally, Crisler giving George the opportunity to coach.
Well, that's a perfect example of George Allen's thinking out of the box. He was like that his entire life. I mean, again, going back to him, these bold moves that he made and doing things that other people just wouldn't do. He offered to pay. Crisler originally turned him down because Allen he had a job at the school at the time. He was going for his master's degree in education. So he had a job at the school at the time. So he had a little bit of a stipend. And, but anyway, he made his way into Crisler's office. I guess he was able to set up an appointment. And he said, Coach, I would like to be an assistant on your team. And Crisler said, no, we don't have any spot for you. So then he thought, I'm going to try again, and I'm going to offer to pay him. And he made his way back into the office. And by the way, I think we should put this into proper context, in that was a great Michigan team. I mean, they finished number 1 in the country in 1947. So that was just, great players and great coach, of course, and Fritz Crisler. That was a top-notch college program. He made his way back into the office. He said, Coach, I'm going to pay you for an opportunity to be an assistant on your team. And Crisler says, no, you don't have to pay me, but we still have an opportunity for you. You can be an assistant on the new 150-pound team. And that's just the way George Allen was his whole life. I mean, he just thought out of the box. He did things that other coaches didn't do. And in terms of his innovations as a coach, I mean, special teams, no other coaches of his time did what he did, putting so much emphasis on special teams and hoping they would produce 1 or 2 victories a season. That's what he depended on special teams for. And his schemes on defense, I mean, nobody had seen the blitz packages that he put forth, and also the nickel and dime defenses. He introduced those back in the early 60s. I think that's when he first had his first opportunity to do so, when he became the Bears defensive coordinator at that time. So it was always this thinking out of the box in terms of George Allen. I mean, he was just he was a genius when it came to football coaching.
He really was. So he gets his break with Michigan and Fritz Crisler, and he parlays that into his first ever job. Talk about that first job and with whom he wound up coaching. How did he land the job and how did he fare?
Well, this is speaking about the same theme. This was another George Allen idea. When he was the assistant on that 150-pound team, so he wanted to become a head coach. He wrote away to hundreds of college programs around the country, and he got a few responses. Three colleges contacted him for potential openings. He ended up going for an interview at Morningside for an assistant, the assistant coaching job at Morningside. So it so happened that the coach at Morningside,
Real quick, where is Morningside?
in Iowa,
Thanks.
Morningside, Iowa, Sioux City, Iowa. So it so happened that the coach at Morningside resigned. He became aligned with a radio station in Iowa. So the head coaching opportunity was there. So the college not only they didn't hire him for the assistant, they hired him as their head coach at Iowa. At Morningside. That's how he got his first college coaching opportunity. The breaks were there. Timing is right. He was just in the right place at the right time.
And how did he do at Morningside?
He had a plus 500 record. He had some pretty good seasons there, and he made them competitive in that conference. But he wanted a better opportunity. He wanted a higher level college program, and so he applied again, and that's how he ended up at Whittier. He coached for 3 seasons at Morningside, and he coached for 6 years at Whittier. And he had again, he did better than 500 there as well. And I believe they won their conference twice.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned special teams. What were so special about special teams to George Allen? What prompted his attention to this facet of the game?
He just thought that they could turn a game in his favor. I mean, it's just that no other coach really thought that way at the time. And he thought, being the so-called third phase of the game, but it really an unknown phase at that time, or a forgotten phase. It's kind of like, throw 11 players on the field and let's get it over with. That was the basic thinking at the time. He thought that they could really produce, in terms of field position. He thought that way. Points, of course. Just turning games in his favor that way. And like I said, he depended on them for 1 or 2 wins per season. I mean, he just thought differently than the other coaches of that era.
His second job, like you said, was at Whittier College in California, and he met with decent success there. George had decent success, even great success, at so many different schools. I mean, at so many different jobs as a coach. But after a half dozen years, he left. But there's a question as to whether or not he left on his own or if he was forced out. Can you explain that to us? And ironically, the guy that replaced George Allen at Whittier is another legendary coach, Don Coryell.
Don Coryell, whose name has actually come up for the Hall of Fame too. But and Coryell, by the way, was more successful than Allen record-wise at Whittier. But around after the 1956 season, and I quoted one of his players from that time as saying this, who spoke to me anonymously, that there was somewhat of a player rebellion around that time. There were a lot of the guys that didn't like George Allen. They didn't like his 3 yards in a cloud of dust type approach on offense. I mean, they liked the days of, they knew of the days prior to George Allen when it was much more of a wide open offense at Whittier, and they wanted that type of system back. At the same time, it seemed that Allen had alienated some of the people in the athletic department and maybe even some of the boosters. There were some unethical things that he actually did while he was at Whittier. Number one being in terms of recruiting, promising too many scholarships for players. So he alienated some of the people in the athletic department. So it was kind of like a confluence of circumstances at the time that So he wasn't technically fired, but I think they kind of nudged him a little bit. That's basically how he exited after the 1956 season. But fortunately for him, I mean, George Allen, here's another George Allen thinking out of the box. He became associated, while he was at Whittier, he would attend the summer training camps of the Los Angeles Rams. Okay. And he got to know Sid Gillum, who was the head coach of the Rams at the time. So after the 56 season, I mean, nobody leaves a job supposedly without another job lined up. He didn't have a job immediately lined up, but Gillum called him afterward, like a few months after he left, and said, "Would you like to come and be an assistant here with the Los Angeles Rams?" And it was kind of an odd fit too, because Allen was hired as a receivers coach, an ends coach, and he was a defensive oriented coach. So it was kind of an odd fit, and it only lasted one season. And Allen was he was technically fired after the 57th season.
Yeah, what happened? Why? What? I think it's a pattern of some sort with George Allen, and just, I guess, wearing out his welcome at places. Why?
I was not able to pinpoint exactly why he was forced out after the 57 season. I did a ton of research through the Los Angeles Times, which was a primary source of mine, and I could not pinpoint any article saying, nobody reported exactly why he left the team. But you have to think that he was fired. I mean, he wouldn't have quit on his own without another job lined up.
Strain on his family without he had a young family. The financial strain.
Yeah, he had to have been pushed out at the time. There's no way that he would have quit on his own volition. And he didn't have another job lined up. But again, George Allen being George Allen, I mean, he had met Halas through he got into one of the NFL meeting sessions in Phoenix, and he got to know Halas through that. Also, Allen, when he wasn't coaching, when he was out of coaching, he got a job with a company that made these weighted footballs, and he would try to sell those footballs to NFL teams. It would be kind of a way they would practice with the football to strengthen themselves, throw it around. So he would try to sell those footballs to different teams. So he in making his way into the Bears training camp, he inched closer to Halas, and Halas learned that Allen wanted to be an assistant on the Bears staff. And sure enough, Halas hired him toward the end of the 58 season as a, quote, spy, because they had 2 late season games against the Los Angeles Rams. So Allen, having been an assistant for the Rams the prior year, Halas brought him in as a spy, and they went 1-1 against the Bears went 1-1 against those Rams teams late in the 58 season. And it was early in 1959 that Halas hired him as a full-time assistant. Head talent scout. He was head talent scout, and then it wasn't until the 1962 season that he was hired as defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I mean, with the Bears, so it's Morningside, Whittier College, the Rams, a little bit of time off. He meets George Halas, gets Halas to bring him to the Bears. And it's a funny statement, but this is where I think George Allen became George Allen. This is where he really developed player personnel moves, trading draft picks for great players who would shape those great Bears teams of the early 60s. It's also where he really developed some of those defensive schemes. Talk about his career in Chicago.
Right. Well, you hit the nail on the head in terms of, I mean, that's where George Allen became George Allen, because when, first of all, as the head talent scout, he had some amazing draft picks that he led. I mean, Mike Ditka being the first big one in 1961. And I don't want to say it was all George Allen, but he had a major say in those picks as the head talent scout on the team. He had Ditka in 1961, Ronnie Bull, who was NFL Rookie of the Year in 1962, running back out of Baylor, and Ditka, of course, being the the first true, you could call him the first true receiving tight end in the league. Allen picked him in 1961, Dick, later Hall of Famer. Then in 1965, he had the Sayers, the Butkus Sayers picks back to back in the first round. So he had some amazing picks as the head talent scout of the Bears. But it wasn't until late in the 62 season, Clark Shaughnessy, the legendary Clark Shaughnessy, who was also known as the, having formed the T formation. That was his claim to fame on offense, but Shaughnessy was mostly a defensive oriented coach. He was the Bears defensive coordinator at the time. He had a falling out with Halas. Okay. And so Shaughnessy just disappeared with 3 games left in the 62 season. And Halas tapped Allen as the interim defensive coordinator. And then once in the early months of 63, Halas named him the full-time defensive coordinator. That's where George Allen really, became what you would call famous. It was that 63 Bears team that won the NFL championship and had one of the greatest defenses in NFL history. In fact, you can make that comparison between the 63 Bears and the 85 Bears, like which defense was better. Obviously, the 85 Bears is much better known because, granted, it was almost 40 years ago, but it was still recent enough for people like you and I to know what that defense accomplished. The 63 Bears defense was really, really good.
Well, he learned a lot under Shaughnessy. That too deteriorated. What happened? What happened? I mean, he's learning under Shaughnessy. He takes over his defense. He leads the Bears to on the defense to championships. What happened to the relationship with Clark Shaughnessy?
They had their own falling out. It could have been that Shaughnessy was jealous of George Allen. I never really pinpointed exactly why they antagonized each other, but there is a quote that I had in the book from a reporter for the Chicago Tribune documenting, how much they disliked each other. Like one day in practice, as the defense was practicing, they were standing at opposite ends of the field. They couldn't stand each other. It could have been jealousy on the part of Shaughnessy. Another, valid point is it could have been differing philosophies. Okay. Shaughnessy just did these crazy things at times that irritated Halas. I mean, these crazy defensive schemes that he put forth, just blitzing at the wrong time, not having enough men back in the defensive backfield, shifting the linemen around to the point where they had bad angles to go toward the quarterback. That was Shaughnessy, and it really, really irritated George Halas. That's a major reason they couldn't stand each other. But then Allen and Shaughnessy didn't like each other too. I think the fact that they had differing defensive philosophies, I think that could have been a major reason. But also the fact that Shaughnessy may have been jealous of George Allen, and I think Halas was jealous of him too, particularly after the Bears won the championship in '63.
Mm-hmm. George studied film and evaluated talent like it was nobody's business. He was obsessed with it. Did he spend much time studying film of college talent? Was there anything to the trades he made, any foresight whatsoever to the amazing draft he had in 1964 when he was able to select back-to-back Butkus and Sayers? Talk about his obsession with film and studying.
Right. He was one of the first coaches in the league that had that devotion to films and spending so much time with those reels. And you got to think, and I spoke to his son, George Allen, about this because he would sit in on his father watching the game film. And back in those days, you had the old projectors. So his father would be like, the projector would go forward a little bit, and then he would put it in reverse. And you'd hear this screeching sound as it went in reverse because he would dissect every little movement, every little play. That was George Allen. And he first did that at the college level, but I think he took it to a new level when he got to the pros. That's when he really had that devotion to game films. I mean, he learned it from coaches like Halas. I mean, he was one of the first 24/7 workaholic coaches as well. I mean, he put in a lot of time, but George Allen, he just took it to like stratospheric levels in terms of his devotion to the game. I mean, and then the players saw it too. The players saw the players who played for him saw how much time he put in. And in fact, I remember quoting some of them saying, we felt so bad for George when he lost. I mean, he took things so seriously, and the losses, they hurt him so much. And part of that was because he devoted so much of his time to preparing for the games. So, and the players would feel really bad for him.
People will say, my gosh, how difficult is it to pick Dick Butkus and Gale Sayers back to back? But was there any sort of risk in doing so? I mean, you look at the Bears today in the first round of this year, the 2024 draft, they picked Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze, and right now, this second, it's not working out too well. So just because somebody has a great college career doesn't mean they're going to have a great professional career. Was there a risk that you're aware of in taking Butkus and Sayers 1 and 2?
I don't think so, no. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from George Allen, but I mean, those were two surefire players. I mean, the fact that, I think Butkus was, having one, back then there was the Butkus Award wasn't created, but being such a elite level college player, I don't think there was too much of a risk with him, if any. And Sayers, basically the same thing. I wouldn't say there were risks with them. But I also want to point out that in addition to those two, Allen had some other phenomenal picks in that 65 draft. He drafted, with the number 8 pick in the first round, he drafted a offensive lineman named Steve DeLong, who opted to play in the AFL for the San Diego Chargers. It was so happened that his very last season in professional football, after like a dozen years, he came back to play for the Bears. But DeLong was a 2-time Pro Bowler in the NFL. I mean, that was a great pick in itself. And then also Allen drafted in the 4th round a running back named Jim Nantz, who opted to play in the AFL too. And he was a several-time All-Pro. So you have to know that there was a lot of attention that George Allen paid to those college players. I mean, how do you know? And you didn't have all of the tools back then. I mean, there was no internet. Just imagine, how you had films. I mean, you had to contact the colleges for their films. That was basically it. And of course, going to watch the games yourself. But and I also told a story in the book about what he did with Eddie Robinson at Grambling. He went down to Grambling to find a defensive lineman, and actually he was after Ernie Ladd, who ended up opting to play in the AFL as well. And then the great professional wrestler. But it ended up that Allen found a great safety in that from Grambling too. He asked Eddie Robinson, "Do you have any fast players?" And Robinson, "Yeah, we got one. He's right here." And Allen signed him as a free agent. And that player, Rosie Taylor, had 9 interceptions in that 63 season. He was tied for first in the league in the number total interceptions. That was a player that Allen signed in free agency. So, but it was also building relationships too. Allen had a great relationship with Eddie Robinson, as I'm sure he did with other college coaches.
He was second to none when it came to hard work, second to none when it came to studying film. He was a visionary. He was a pioneer, and he worked his way from working for and actually asking to pay for the opportunity to work on Fritz Crisler's staff, to becoming the head coach at Morningside, then Whittier, and then working his way up to an assistant on the Rams, and then with the Bears. And shortly after all of that, George Allen finally got the opportunity of a lifetime to become an NFL head coach. But it wouldn't come without a fight. He leaves the Bears to become head coach of the Los Angeles Rams. Tell us about the controversy in his becoming the head coach of the Rams.
Well, it was just another surreal moment in the life of George Allen. And this is also going back to what I said about Halas. I think Halas was jealous of him. Okay. He was jealous of all of the accolades that George Allen had gotten, mainly after the Bears winning the 63 championship. Allen being carried off the field and then getting a game ball afterward. And then the players singing, hooray for George. He's a horse's ass. That wasn't meant for Halas. That was meant for George Allen. So yeah, so Halas was jealous of Allen because of that. So then after the 65 season, I mean, George Allen was getting hungry for a head coaching opportunity. I mean, he was mid to late 40s at the time. I mean, he wanted that chance to be a head coach in the NFL. So the opening came about with the Los Angeles Rams. Allen was offered the position and he accepted it verbally. Halas caught wind of it and he said, George Allen, you can't do that. And he took him to court, circuit court in Cook County, Illinois, the Chicago area, took him to court. He filed a civil suit against him for, because he felt he was in possession of proprietary information. And in fact, in looking back at his Bears contract, there was a paragraph in there that said that George Allen is in possession of very important Bears information, and this cannot be shared with anyone else. But it was kind of petty on the part of Halas to do that. I mean, there was a precedent back in the early 50s where Halas had refused to allow another assistant to leave, but this time around he did not want Allen to leave. He didn't want him to get that head coaching job in Los Angeles. So Halas actually won the case. The judge ruled for Halas, but he stood up immediately. He said, listen, thank you, Your Honor. George Allen is now free to go wherever he wants to go. So he released him at that point. He made his point.
Yeah,
with winning the case.
Why would he do that? I guess it was just to make a point.
It was make a point that, hey, I was right, that he was in possession of this proprietary information. He was in the wrong for doing what he was trying to do, leaving the Bears at that time. But Halas won the case, and then he said, listen, George Allen, you're free to go wherever you want. So that's how Allen became the head coach of the Los Angeles Rams. It was January of 1966.
Ironically, I just thought of this. The one guy he got along with out of all the guys, out of all the owners, out of all the coaches, the one he got along with the most, I guess, might have been George Halas, and that's the one he spurned to leave.
That is, yes, correct to an extent, but he also, for quite a while, he got along with Jack Kent Cooke.
Yes.
Right. He got along with Jack Kent.
But Halas didn't ask him to leave. He was basically asked to leave every place else.
Right, exactly right. But of course, Halas did give him a hard time when he wanted to leave. But I mean, there was just that kind of friction between the two. But I mean, and nothing would. Nothing was unusual for George Allen when he was in Los Angeles either. I mean, he had friction with Reeves, the Rams owner.
So how did his time with the Rams go? How soon was it before he and Rams owner Dan Reeves started to not get along? And what were the underlying reasons for them not getting along?
I think Reeves saw it several months into the time that George Allen became the head coach. George Allen wanted to do things his way. I mean, he was a no-nonsense coach. And prior to his arrival, I mean, that Rams team was a partying team. I mean, Reeves was a guy who would party. I mean, he was a drinker. So whether it was the players or the assistant coaches, I mean, Reeves would party with those guys. I mean, he really wanted to have a good time. And that's why those Rams teams prior to Allen's arrival were mediocre at best. I mean, they had gone 7 years without having a winning season. So Allen gets there. I mean, no nonsense, my way or the highway. And that's basically how he approached it. Also, Allen had control of player salaries. He had control of the active roster, and Reeves had control of the draft. So in having control of the active roster, Allen could make decisions and contractual decisions as well on players coming to the team and how much they were going to be paid. And that really angered Reeves and other members of the front office who were buddies with Reeves. I mean, so that's a major reason that there was antagonism between those two.
Well, don't jump ahead of me here because this is going to get pretty interesting. Despite his success, Allen was ultimately let go by Reeves after 5 years after compiling a record of 49 wins, 17 losses, 4 ties. He did go 0-2 in the playoffs. Don't jump ahead yet. But was it at all surprising to the rest of the league that Reeves said, get out?
I can't say like how many other people. I'm sure maybe a lot of the other owners knew about, the fact that there was friction between Allen and Reeves. I don't know about other members of the front office and players, but so to those other owners, it probably was not a surprise in terms of what happened to them. I think it was surprising though, in the sense that the Rams had that record that you just mentioned. I mean, it was like 29. It was a phenomenal record in Allen's first 3 seasons, and Reeves fired him after the 68 season. So,
right. So here we go. He was 8-6 his first year, Mike. He was 11-1-2 his second year. He was 10-3-1 his third year, and Reeves lets him go. But
right.
It wasn't long before Reeves rehired him. Later, much later, it gets even crazier with the Rams, years later. But right now, let's just stick here. Reeves rehires Allen after he fires him. Take us through this crazy period. What happened? How crazy was this? I mean, as I'm reading this in your book, and when I knew about it, sort of, I read about it, I go, my gosh, this is a preamble to the George Steinbrenner, Billy Martin years.
Well, just also to put things in proper perspective, that 1967 Rams team, I think that was Allen's greatest team in the NFL, even better than the 72 Redskins. I mean, that team had everything, offense and defense. I mean, Roman Gabriel was entering his prime as an NFL quarterback. The Roman Gabriel that existed in the 60s with the Rams, it wasn't the same Roman Gabriel that played for the Eagles in the 70s. That Roman Gabriel in the 60s, he became one of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL. In fact, he was the NFL MVP in 1969. So Allen had him. He had a receiver named Bernie Casey, a really good offensive line. He had good backs. On defense, he had the fearsome foursome. He had, arguably the greatest defensive line in NFL history. He had excellent linebackers, Jack Pardee, great defensive backs, including Irv Cross. I mean, just a well-balanced team. So that 11-1-2 team, in my opinion, was Allen's best team in his 12 years coaching in the NFL. And I also want to say something else about that 1967 season. The Baltimore Colts finished 11-1-2 that year as well. And just to paint a picture of the competitiveness of the league at the time, that Colts team didn't even go to the playoffs. I mean, that would be unthinkable today with 7 teams per conference going to the playoffs. I mean, teams with losing records winning divisions. So, but the Rams and the Colts were in the same division at the time. So here we go to after the 68 season. Reeves just said, I've had enough of George Allen. He's, doing things to his way, and I don't like the decisions he's making personnel wise. He's paying these guys too much money. And I also think that Reeves was jealous of him as well. So he fired him after the 68 season. So just a few days later, Allen called for a press conference at a local Los Angeles hotel, and about 20 of the veteran Rams players showed up to support their coach. I mean, it was basically him saying, I'd like my job back. Hopefully, Dan Reeves, you will reconsider me as your head coach and rehire me. So you had Roman Gabriel, Deacon Jones, Ed Metter, another quality veteran player. Lamar Lundy was there, fearsome foursome member. So 20 of those veteran Rams showed up, and they basically said, listen, Dan Reeves, if you don't rehire George Allen, we're going to quit. which means that Rams team will become a losing team. So sure enough, a few weeks later, Reeves did rehire him. Also, as I wrote in the book, the team doctor, Allen became friends with the team doctor, and the team doctor was also friends with Reeves. So the doctor organized a meeting between Allen and Reeves, and the doctor told Allen beforehand, now listen, George, Reeves knows you're a teetotaler, all right? Allen didn't drink, by the way. And like I said before, Reeves was a drinker. So the doctor said to Allen, listen, don't just ask for one drink. You ask for 2 drinks when you go in there. So Reeves and Allen were, laughing and having a great time while they met. And Reeves didn't offer him the job back right then, but I think that loosened him up enough to offer it back just a few days after that.
And then, so he's back on the team. He's back as the coach of the team. They go 11-3 in '69, 9-4-1 in 1970, and that was it. What happened? Why was he let go then?
Because Allen, as I wrote, he was basically a lame duck coach when he was hired after the '68 season. Lame duck in the sense that either you win the Super Bowl in '69 or any of the, well, he had a 5-year contract which expired after the '70 season. So you win the Super Bowl in the coming years, or, you're not going to coach the Rams. You're going to be fired, which is basically what happened. So that's the belief as to why he was fired after the 1970 season. But he still had that phenomenal 49-17-4 record in overall in his 5 years coaching the Rams. But at the same time, Allen knew he was going to be hired quickly by another NFL team, right after he was fired by the Rams. But there was no player rebellion at that time. There were no press conferences. Allen, he parted quietly, put it that way. But he was hired by the Redskins just a few days later.
Right. So there you are. You're sitting there right now with your Redskins cap. You got the big Redskins helmet behind you. No secret who your favorite team is, Mike. I would say, as a longtime Giants fan, I would say that George Allen, out of all the teams he was associated with, is probably best known for his years in Washington. I don't want to get into game-oriented details. Rather, let's first discuss some interesting sidebars. Talk about trading the same draft pick, not once, but more than one time. Did George Allen trade the same draft pick to 2 different teams? How can such a thing happen? I mean, what or if were there any penalties, and doesn't the league bear some responsibility for letting something like that happen?
Right. Well, number one, I think this was kind of the sleazy, maybe a little unethical nature of George Allen doing that. Trading the same draft picks for different players. And in terms of the league, what Bruce Allen, George Allen's son, later, Redskins team president and longtime NFL executive, what he explained to me is that the NFL had a draft board, okay, and they didn't process it correctly in terms of what picks Allen had already traded. So Bruce Allen blamed it on the NFL, okay. George Allen, the coach, I mean, you got to think that he knew what he was doing. I mean, he traded the same draft picks, but he got away with it. I mean, things were not electronic back then. So, but he did get fined for it. And there were actually some owners in the league who wanted him out. They wanted him kicked out of the league for what happened. Edward Bennett Williams, the Redskins team president and minority partner who ran the daily operations of the Redskins at the time, he supported Allen. He said, no, listen, George Allen is staying here. But there were other owners around the league who wanted him out for doing that.
The press, especially in Washington, beginning with Sonny Jurgensen and Billy Kilmer, their quarterback battle. Allen and the media, they didn't always get along. Talk about his relationship with the press.
For one, I think Allen, when he became the head coach of the Redskins, I didn't really get this sense so much when he was coach of the Rams, but when he became coach of the Redskins, there was like this paranoia about him in terms of what was reported. Okay, he had this fear that anything negative about the team would influence the players in a negative way, and they wouldn't perform up to par or whatever. He didn't want that type of news getting out. So he developed this antagonistic relationship with the Washington media. And in fact, it really, really heightened in the 1972 season after losing their first game of the season to the then lowly New England Patriots. There were rumors flying around that, hey, is George Allen is he going to go from Billy Kilmer to Sonny Jurgensen as a starting quarterback? So the Washington Post did report that, and Allen didn't really care for that. If Allen had his way, he would have wanted closed practices without the media there. Okay, he didn't want to have anything to do with the press. But he was kind of ahead of his time in a way, because you look at Bill Belichick, his days coaching the Patriots. I mean, the guy, when he would answer the question, he would mumble the answer. I mean, he was very guarded in what he told the press. And I think a lot of other coaches around the league and in professional sports are like that today as well. And with all of the media that exists today, I mean, there's just, these coaches are so careful in what they say, and they don't want anything to be misconstrued and anything to reflect negatively on them and the team.
George was as successful in the regular season as any coach. We said it already. He was 49-17 with 4 ties with the Rams. He was 67-30 with 1 tie with the Redskins, now the Commanders, but back then the Redskins. But he was only 2-7 as a head coach in the playoffs. Why wasn't he more successful in the playoffs? And how much do you think his intensity hurt his team in the playoffs?
I think based on different seasons, there are different answers to that question. The 1967 season, for one, the last 2 games of the regular season, one was a win over the Baltimore Colts. Okay. And then the next last game of the season was a very emotional victory over the Packers. That was Tony Guillory's block punt at the end of the game that set up the Rams for the winning touchdown. And that was George Allen beating Vince Lombardi. I mean, that was a huge win. And that game set up a showdown at the end of the regular season against the mighty Baltimore Colts. And as I pointed out earlier, the Colts finished 11-1-2 that season. The Rams demolished the Colts in the last regular season game in 1967. That got them into the playoffs. So they were just emotionally drained at the time they went into the playoffs playing the Packers. And it so happened that was an era where there was a rotation going on in terms of which team would host the first round playoff game. Okay. The Packers had a 9-4-1 record that year. The Rams were 11-1-2, but the Rams had to go on the road. So, being on that emotional high at the end of the regular season and then having to go on the road against the Packers, I mean, I think that played a major role. That combination of circumstances played a major role in the Rams performing, and they were pretty much flat in that playoff game against the Packers. In the 69 season, they lost their last 3 regular season games. They started that season 11-0, and then they lost their last 3 regular season games. They went into and really fought that Minnesota Vikings team. That Vikings team was they ended up in Super Bowl 4. The Rams fought them in that playoff game and nearly pulled that one off, but could not. And that was played on the road too, although the Vikings had a better record, so they deserved to host that game. But again, the Rams lost the last 3 regular season games of that season. So they were on a somewhat downward trajectory going into that playoff game. In the 73 through 76 playoff appearances, that era of Allen's coaching career, I would say that Redskins team was very good, but it was not an elite team. And actually, as I pointed out in my presentation to PFRA, the Redskins did not have an elite quarterback at the time, so they could push their way through the regular season. After the 72 Super Bowl season, or the year they lost to the Dolphins in the Super Bowl. They were very good. They could push their way to playoff appearances, and they had 3 more before Allen stepped down after the 77 season. But they weren't a great team. They weren't an elite team. They didn't have that elite quarterback, and they had aging players as well. And this goes to Allen's reliance on veteran players. They didn't have those younger legs. And as I wrote in the book, Allen didn't dare to be bad, okay? There was actually a reporter from the Washington Post, Ken Denlinger, who pointed that out. It's like Allen would not dare to be bad for a season or two, where he would just let his teams, have a terrible record for a season or two and then get a very high draft pick. That just wasn't George Allen. He wanted that assurance that he was going to get into the playoffs each year. So,
but how much did his reliance, they weren't just veterans, how much did his reliance on older veterans do you think affected his team's performance in the playoffs?
I don't think they had the legs to make that deep run in the playoffs. I think that's where the impact was, in having those older veterans, players that he relied on for so many years. I mean, you had Pat Fisher, who had been in the league since 1961, Ron McDowell since 1961. I mean, they played on that 76 team that was a wild card team and lost in the first round to the Vikings. And as I said, they didn't have an elite quarterback either. And interestingly, after the 74 season, and I uncovered this at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in the George Allen archives, but Edward Bennett Williams wrote a memo to Allen after the 74 season telling him, listen, you can't keep both Sonny Jurgensen and Billy Kilmer on the team at the same time. And I'd like you to elevate Joe Theismann to the starting role at quarterback. Okay. So I explored the fact in the book, if Allen had followed through on that, if he had named Theismann to the starting role, would Theismann had developed faster as a really good, if not great, NFL quarterback? And would Allen have had that quarterback that could have taken them farther in the playoffs? Theismann said no. Theismann said, no, it probably wouldn't have made any difference. I mean, he said if George Allen had his way, he would have wanted to win. George Allen having a great day meant winning a game 2-0. That was George Allen. So, but it wasn't until Joe Gibbs became the Redskins coach in the early '80s that Theismann became one of the so-called elite quarterbacks in the league.
Yeah, talk about his relationship, George, with Jack Kent Cooke and Edward Bennett Williams.
Sure. Well, he first met Cooke when he was the coach of the Los Angeles Rams. Cooke resided in Los Angeles because he owned the Los Angeles Lakers and the Kings. And Allen met him they were in similar circles. So that's how they first came in contact. And they actually became pretty good friends. I mean, Cooke would invite the Allen family to sporting events, and they also invited them to their ranch in California. So they became pretty close. So after the 70 season, Edward Bennett Williams, for one, really wanted George Allen. They had first met at an NFL meeting after the 66 season, and Williams really became impressed with him. So Williams wanted him. Williams really, and Cooke wanted him as their head coach after the 68 season. That was the first time they wanted him. Okay. Allen decided he wanted to stay with the Rams. But after the 70 season, that's when they were successful in reeling him in and getting him into DC. So both Williams and Cooke wanted him. So at that time, I mean, everything was great between Allen and those two guys, Williams and Cooke. But that in the ensuing years, that's when the relationships deteriorated. And in fact, toward the 1977 season, Williams offered Allen a coaching extension prior to the season. Allen never signed it, and he still wouldn't sign it when the season was over. And that eventually led to him being released by the Redskins and then signing with the Rams. But Cooke would not stick up for Allen at the time. He agreed with Williams that, first of all, they were going to strip him of his general manager duties, and they were going to keep him from having the stock option clause, which was not a part of his original contract, but had been offered to him reportedly in a separate letter from Jack Kent Cooke in 1971 when he was first hired with the Redskins. Allen never exercised the stock option. It was like a 5% stock that he could have had in the team. He never bought into it. He wanted to, as of 1977, but Williams never offered it to him. And Cook agreed with Williams at the time that Allen was not going to get that stock option. So all of those circumstances led to Allen's departure after the 77 season, as well as the fact that Chuck Knox, the Rams coach, left after the 77 season. He became the Buffalo Bills coach. So the door was open for Allen to return to Los Angeles.
And that is the craziest of the crazy things, to me anyway, that happened to George Allen during his long and illustrious career. There is so much to the George Allen story. It's phenomenal. You did such a great job, and it took a big book, almost 500 pages, but they were a great 500 pages. And Mike, I mean, what you wrote is terrific. And we're just not going to be able to cover it all, but we do have to talk about his second go-round with the Rams, or if you want to call it his third go-round, right? Because he was hired to be their coach in 66, fired after the 68 season, hired again just a couple days later, leads them in 69, leads them in 70, then he goes to the Redskins. He is out of Washington after the 77 season, and he winds up again as the coach of the Rams.
Right.
Sort of.
This is his fourth go-around in Los Angeles because he had the 57.
Oh, that's right. His fourth. You're right, as the assistant.
Right.
So he leads them through training camp, couple of exhibition games, and then I can't think of anything like this happening in the NFL on any other occasion. He was gone after 2 exhibition games. What happened?
Actually, I do want to say that there was a circumstance with the Redskins in the early 50s where a coach left after, I think, like three weeks into training camp. So this wasn't totally unprecedented, but just the way this whole thing played out was wild. I think from the very moment that Rosenblum hired him, Carroll Rosenblum hired him, Rosenblum had him on a short leash. Okay. He hired George Allen for his ability to beat the Dallas Cowboys, who were beating the Rams in the playoffs prior to his arrival. And also the Vikings were beating them too. And Allen, struggled more so against the Vikings. But Dallas, I mean, he played Tom Landry, better than any other coach in NFL history. He had Landry's number. So, but Rosenblum hired him to beat the Cowboys. And also Allen did not have any general manager duties, strictly coaching. And Rosenblum had him on a short leash. You could tell from the comments that Rosenblum made when he first hired him. I mean, he was kind of like, he said, George, you better win now, so to speak. So we get into training camp. Allen, he was implementing his policies. He had a no water policy. Okay. Now, he wasn't the only coach in NFL history to do this. There were many other coaches that did it. I would say Vince Lombardi probably had a similar policy, and there were other coaches. But you're also talking about the late 70s.
It's not what it is today. I mean, we know so much more today, and we could actually look back at a lot of coaches that had a no water policy.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, team doctors, everybody was becoming a lot more health conscious. So he had the no water policy. He had the no trash policy on the field. Players couldn't leave cups and other types of trash on the field, which actually a lot of the players didn't like that, okay? Fred Dreyer, for one, didn't like that. He didn't like the players sitting on their helmets on the sidelines while watching practice, okay? He wanted them standing at attention. That was George Allen, He wanted total devotion on the part of his players to the issue at hand, and that was football, okay? George Allen wanted out of his players what George Allen put into the game as well. That's kind of what I was explaining before. So players didn't like that. That Rams team, that was a winning team. They just couldn't get, make that deep playoff run. That was a winning team, and they had a great defense as well. Okay, which is actually, and I quoted Dreyer saying this in the book. Why hire a defensive-oriented coach? Dreyer had meetings with Rosenblum prior to the hiring of a head coach. Dreyer wanted Coryell, who was, the Air Coryell, score 50 points a game. Dreyer said, that's all we need is Coryell. I mean, we'll beat every team. We already have a great defense. We don't need George Allen. Rosenblum hires George Allen. So, there was friction in training camp. I mentioned those George Allen policies. Players were ratting on him. They spoke to members of the front office. Rams lost their first 2 exhibition games. After the second exhibition game, Rosenblum just said, George Allen, you're gone. You're fired. I mean, it was just another surreal moment in the life of George Allen in the NFL.
I like to do these in about an hour's time, and we're pushing it. So we're going to wrap this up quickly, because again, there's so much more. We're not even going to get into the Long Beach State story. Anybody who wants to know about Long Beach State, you've got to go out and buy Mike's book. I promise you, you are not going to be disappointed. George Allen, A Football Life. Mike, was he blackballed? Was Art Modell right in his assessment that George Allen was just too much for owners of teams to handle?
I think that the owners throughout the rest of the league saw him as a cancer. Because going back to explaining, George Allen doing things his way, kind of my way or the highway, well George Allen was like, he would tell the players, it's us against management, fellas. That's kind of the way he approached things, okay? And it really irritated the management of the teams, and particularly the owners. I mean, he had the antagonistic relationships with Reeves and then Williams. I mean, so owners didn't want to put up with that. Also, when Allen left the Redskins after the 77 season, that was kind of the era when teams were hiring general managers as well as coaches. I mean, they were separating those duties. The Redskins, for one, hired Bobby Beathard in 1978 and Jack Pardee, who replaced Allen. So, and Allen wanted those general manager duties at the same time that he was head coach. It so happened that, he took that Rams job without having the GM duties in 78. But I think if he wanted another opportunity getting back into the NFL, he wanted to be a general manager. And owners were not that receptive to doing that. I mean, they wanted to separate those coaching duties, but they also looked at Allen, and they knew he also made these comments about Edward Bennett Williams upon being let go after the 77 season that other owners found out about, such as calling him a cold-blooded fish. Okay, and there were other derogatory comments that he made about Williams at the time. They were reported by first by a local newspaper, the Washington Star, and it got around. The other owners found out about it. They said, we don't want to put up with this stuff. So I can say that he was truly blackballed.
George Allen won a lot during the regular season. He didn't win a lot in the playoffs. Some players liked him, other players didn't. He had a contentious relationship with ownership. When we look back at the career of George Allen, how do you characterize it? What do you say?
I say he was one of the elite coaches of that era. He was up there with Lombardi and Shula, particularly in the 1960s when he coached the Rams. That was George Allen at the height of his coaching career. He was an elite coach for most of his coaching career, and he had great teams. I mean, you go 12 seasons in the NFL without a losing season, and then you add in his 2 years in the USFL, 14 years in pro coaching without a losing season. I mean, it's hard to really, fully understand, fully grasp what goes into producing such a phenomenal record like that. I mean, but that was George Allen. He never had a losing season. Number 3 all time today in terms of winning percentage in the regular season, behind Madden and Lombardi. He was just, but that particular era, he was one of the elite coaches in the NFL. Lombardi and Shula and Allen.
Mike, absolutely terrific. How can people get a copy of your book?
Please go to my website, MikeRichmanJournalist.com, and I'll be happy to autograph copies of George Allen, A Football Life for you. And also copies of 2 of my other books are available on the website, the Redskins Encyclopedia and Joe Gibbs, An Enduring Legacy. I also authored those books.
Mike, that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining me on Sports Forgotten Heroes. I could talk to you for so much longer about George Allen, but I think we covered a lot. This has been great. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Warren, for having me on. I really enjoyed the discussion.
What an absolutely terrific conversation with Mike. His knowledge about the career of George Allen is amazing, and I certainly hope you enjoyed this episode of Sports Forgotten Heroes. Hey, as we wind down the year 2024, just a quick note, Sports Forgotten Heroes will be going on a short hiatus. I'll be off for the holidays, but I'll be back with all new episodes starting late January. Until then, thanks for your support, and I do wish everyone a happy holiday season, and I'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.